welcome to Rebel Headquarters. We got a couple of great guests for you guys on tonight's show. As always, they're progressive because this is a hub for progressives. By the way, if you've got a story you want us to cover, you got an event you want us to cover, a rally, a conference that progressives are putting together, or other progressive candidates, email us at rebelhq@tytnetwork.com. That's rebelhq@tytnetwork.com. All right, now joining me, a Democrat running in Virginia's 10th district. It's a very crowded race. There's 11 Democrats running there. The incumbent is very vulnerable, Barbara Comstock. And joining me is Deep Shran. Have I pronounced that right?
It's Deep Saran. That's Saran. Right, deep like water. That's yes. Right. Hi, Jake, how are you?
Great, how you doing?
Good, thanks.
Okay, I found out earlier today that you actually went to law school with a very good friend of mine. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I didn't know that before we booked you, but that's good. So you're running against Barbara Comstock. The reason she's vulnerable is because that district voted for Obama and Hillary Clinton, and in Hillary Clinton's case by 10 points. So first question for you is, what in the world is a conservative like Barbara Comstock doing as your congressperson?
I think that's the question everybody is asking, and after 2016, it was a real surprise. And I think the thing is, she is able to sell herself to constituents as a moderate, even though she votes with Trump about 96% of the time. I think 538.com said, in terms of her distance from her constituents, she's number 4 out of 435 representatives. So she's everywhere, and she is somehow plays herself as a moderate.
Well, I know how. It's through marketing, which is what the Republicans are best at. So apparently in a meeting today, she went out of her way to tell Trump that we don't need a government shutdown. So it's painted by all the press as Barbara Comstock stands up to Donald Trump. What you don't see in any of those stories is that she votes with him 96% of the time. So,
I think the media, sorry, Mike.
Go ahead, Deep.
I was gonna say, I think the media coverage is critical here. The same thing happened with her ACA non-vote. She waited until the last minute. She was gonna vote to repeal, but then the votes weren't there, and all the media reported is Comstock votes not to repeal ACA. You're exactly right. The media coverage is shallow, and as a result, she gets a bump. And I think in 2018, we're gonna see her do this throughout the cycle. She's gonna appear to distance herself from Trump.
Yes, and by the way, on the tax cuts for the rich, she voted yes. So,
absolutely.
Of course. So now we get to the question of which Democrat to support in this important race that is a very winnable race for the Democrats. And there are 11 of you. So why you and not the others?
There are actually 9, I think, but still, it's 2 years ago, the party had to beg somebody to run. Now there are 9 of us. I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind. I think first and foremost, you need somebody who can represent the whole district. I'm an educator, small business owner, son of immigrants in a very diverse district. So you need to be able to understand what everyone expects of you, not just Democrats, not just progressives. I think the second thing is this district can be a national leader. It can be a progressive leader. And we need a strong voice for core progressive values. And that's what I would be. And I think the final thing actually is something you mentioned at the end of your broadcast, which is the Republicans go to the mat on certain issues. They live and die on certain issues, and they defend all the way until the end. And I think that's what we need from districts like this one, somebody who's gonna really protect the most vulnerable, somebody who's gonna fight for justice and fairness, and somebody who's gonna really commit to a bottom-up approach to economic well-being in this country.
So Deep, you emphasize education almost more than any candidate that I've talked to in this cycle. Why? Why do you care so much about that particular issue?
Well, I know from experience, it's been the last 20 years. I know if you do education right, it can be transformative. It can be the engine of economic opportunity and social justice. I mean, every day in the classroom, I know if you give teachers freedom, you talk to students as equals, you commit to getting them involved in the process, you give them good content, they'll see it as important and it'll change their lives. And my view is working with teenagers is we can't get out of the way soon enough. I know the power of education, and I know that applies, in secondary school, if we can address higher ed affordability, if we can talk about adult education, it's transformative. And it is really the way to build a better nation and a better world.
So what is your experience in the education field?
So it's wide ranging. So of course I was a disgruntled student. I would sit in high school and wonder, why is it like this? Why won't they tell me what AP Calculus is for? Why am I sitting here 7 hours a day? That's a great place to start as an educational designer, is being disappointed. But I went to college, had a great experience. I went to law school, got my doctorate in education. But throughout, I've always been a contrarian. So I've taught at the university level. I've taught at a public charter school in DC. I founded my own independent school. I work with public school teachers all the time on what they need to make education better. So I've kind of, I've taught teachers, I've taught students, I've started a school, I started an educational technology company because I think technology plays a role, but the teacher always has to be at the center. So I've really looked at this thing top to bottom from all sides. And I think ultimately being a classroom teacher is what's most important. You see what is possible.
So, but you're running for US Congress. What would the federal government, or what could the federal government do for public education?
I think that's a great question. The federal government accounts for about 10% of the total, $600+ billion we spend on K-12. The federal government needs to take a leadership role. It can promote innovation, for example, by just changing creating incentives to change the sorts of assessments we use. Instead of testing reading and math, why don't we test what kids really need in the 21st century? It can promote equity so that zip code does not determine outcome. And it can do a better job of really showing every student and every teacher that you have a clean, modern, safe space. So when I think about infrastructure spending, I think it should start with education. And so I think the federal government has a real opportunity to make sure that all American kids have a really amazing opportunity to be part of the political, social, and civic life in this country.
But you said something in there that's a bit of a third rail in American politics, one that doesn't get talked about much at all. But if you go to a local area that is well-to-do and say, I'm not going to spend education funding based on your zip code, which is a affluent one, I'm going to do it so that poor kids and middle-class kids get the same amount of money, you're going to have war on your hands.
You're exactly right. Voters vote with their feet. But I think what's critical, and that's where I think the federal government comes in, is it can be the difference maker. We don't need to meddle with local property tax calculations, but if the federal government can come in and make up the difference between Northern Virginia and Southwestern Virginia. Northern Virginia, 70% of the world's internet traffic goes through my county. Southwestern Virginia, you don't have broadband access. That's where the federal government can make a big difference without, as you say, kind of upsetting the folks who are investing in public education in their local communities.
Okay, now how about other issues? What's your claim to being more progressive, if that's your claim, than some of the other people running in the primary?
I think, again, I think we'll all define progressive differently, but ultimately I think what distinguishes progressives is we really are committed to outcomes that start from the bottom up. And so, I've worked in the public interest my whole life. I was a corporate lawyer for a few years, but have been working in education since the late 90s. And that is all about what is good for everyone. How do you create opportunity? So number one, committed to a bottom up approach. At the same time, I'm a private sector guy. The private sector is amazing. And I think one of the things that those of us on the Democratic side or the progressive side really need to understand is, the private sector has a role in solving a lot of these problems, and I'm sensitive to that. But ultimately, my goal in Congress is to defend the most vulnerable. Otherwise, I'm a history teacher, and the same people always get hurt. Brown people get hurt, poor people get hurt, women get hurt. And so it's critical that to go into Congress from a district like mine, where there's no economic pressure and it's a diverse district, you have an opportunity to really show leadership to say, good government costs less than less government. The government can actually solve problems. And we need to push back against this fundamental assault on the fact that, the greatest thing we did, in terms of the human condition is to give the government an opportunity to work to get, to allow us to work together to solve problems. And so I would come to Congress with a real problem-solving orientation.
All right, Deep, one more thing. Has there been any reaction by the establishment to your candidacy? Supporting it, not supporting it?
I think, I think the Democratic Party has been good about an open primary, but it is clear that the parties are stuck in their old ways and they just look at money like it's some sort of horse race. And I think until the parties diminish the role of money in these campaigns and really talk about which candidate can talk to people in their district, has been in the district a long time, can mobilize grassroots energy, we're going to have problems. And so I think the party has been good with this open primary, but at the same time, I think it overemphasizes the role of money, which ultimately dilutes the voice of individual citizens.
All right, let me show everybody the links for Deep. If you're watching live, there they are, deepforcongress.com, etc. If you're watching on YouTube, the links will be in the description box below and on Facebook in the comment section. Deep, thank you so much for joining us at Rebel Headquarters. Appreciate it.